Dust swirled through the narrow streets of Onugu that morning, and beneath its haze stood Amara Okoye, the daughter of a man once respected in the village as a skilled mechanic, whose calloused hands kept engines alive and whose laughter carried like a drumbeat at every festival. But today, there was no laughter, no safety net, only silence, because her father's death had carved a hollow in my life that no sympathy could fill, and with her mother long buried, she was left at the mercy of Madame Felicia, her stepmother, a woman whose tongue was sharper than the razor blade sold at the junction kiosk and whose eyes measured Amara not as family but as property to be spent. The house that once echoed with her father's humming now creaked with debt collectors at the gate, neighbors whispering about unpaid rent, and children mocking. See the mechanic's daughter? She will end up hawking Akata forever. At dawn, Amada washed her uniform for school with water fetched from a distant well, dreaming still of finishing nursing and healing lives like a mother once did. But Felicia laughed at such dreams, snapping, "Books do not cook rice, girl. Survival comes first." That week, the landlord delivered his final warning in a voice too polite to be mercy. And when he left, Felicia sat at the wooden table, fingers tapping like a drummer rehearsing war, and declared, "A solution exists. You will marry." Amada froze, her spoon clattering into a chipped enamel bowl, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. And before she could protest, Felicia continued, "A blind man from the market, Kenechi, has asked for a wife. He is humble, needs hands, and you need shelter. God has joined problem to problem." The cruelty was wrapped in the language of salvation, but Amada heard chains in every word. Her step-siblings, Chike and Bisi, exchanged smirks like hyenas scenting weakness, their jeers echoing, "From lecture halls to leading a blind beggar, see your destiny." That night, Amada lay on her mat, staring at the ceiling where geckos clung, whispering to the dark, "Papa, Mama, is this what my life has become?" The next day, Felicia wasted no time. She summoned neighbors as witnesses, cola nuts on the table, a tired pastor who loved fees more than faith, and Kenechi himself, guided by a cane, dressed in a plain shirt that smelled faintly of lemon soap. His cousin Uzo trailed behind, quiet but watchful, placing envelopes on the table with the precision of a man accustomed to transactions. And Felicia's face glowed as if gold had fallen from heaven. Amada's eyes darted, searching for escape, but the walls pressed closer, the voices around her louder, and when the pastor read vows, she repeated them not with hope, but with the obedience of someone crushed beneath the weight of survival. Outside, children mocked as she was ushered into Uzo's Corolla, the sky brooding with unfallen rain, and her stepmother whispered in her ear, "Remember who saved you." Saved, Amada thought bitterly, staring at the dusty road slipping past, saved not from hunger, but from dignity, chained to a life she had not chosen. Yet, even as despair coiled around her, she noticed Kenechi's calm presence beside her, the way he turned toward her voice when she answered politely, the way he smiled faintly as if he carried secrets larger than the market. And though she did not know it then, though her stepmother gloated that she had cast her into a pit, Amada was not walking into the end of her story, but into the beginning of a mystery that would shatter every whisper of mockery, every ledger of debt, and every lie spoken over her life, because the man she was forced to marry, the man the world dismissed as blind and poor, carried an empire hidden beneath his silence. And one day, when truth peeled back its disguise, the same voices that mocked her would kneel in awe. The Corolla rattled along the Enugu Expressway, carrying Amara away from the only home she had ever known and into a future she had not chosen. And though her body sat stiffly against the seat, her mind swirled with questions sharp as thorns. How could her stepmother trade her life like market yam? How could God watch and stay silent? How would she, a 19-year-old student nurse, survive as the wife of a blind man mocked by neighbors as a beggar? Uzo drove in silence, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror as if guarding a secret, while beside her Kenichi sat upright, cane across his knees, his face turned slightly toward her, his dark glasses hiding eyes that no longer followed light but still seemed to listen deeply. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried the steadiness of water finding its own path. "I know you did not choose me, Amara. I know this was forced. But I promise you, in this house, you will never be treated as less than a wife." His words startled her. She expected bitterness, perhaps demands, but instead she heard dignity wrapped in gentleness. And though her heart resisted, a small crack of curiosity let his tone slip in like dawn after a long night. When they arrived at his bungalow tucked behind a bread kiosk, Amara's eyes swept the modest compound, curtains faded but clean, floors scrubbed, shelves labeled in dots she could not read but understood as braille, a kettle whistling on the stove like a shy bird. Poverty was here, yes, but not filth, not neglect, rather a quiet order that contradicted the gossip of neighbors. That evening, while Felicia at home counted her new notes and laughed with Bisi about the madman's wife, Amara found herself surprised by the way Kenichi moved confidently in his space, counting steps to the cupboard, tilting his head to catch the rhythm of boiling water, arranging his trays of phone parts with precision born of long practice. "I sell accessories at the night market," he explained, fingers brushing cables and sockets. "People think I cannot, but blindness is not foolishness." She studied him, unsure whether to feel pity or respect. And when he asked softly, "What is your dream?" her throat tightened before she whispered, "To finish nursing, to heal people the way my mother once did." He nodded, smile small but sincere. "Then let us walk toward that dream together." The days that followed were not easy. Money was thin, meals often stretched with more water than flavor, and at the university gate, other students whispered cruelly, "See, Chief Okoya's daughter, from riches to rags, now following a blind man," laughter cutting sharper than knives. But when she lowered her head in shame, Kenichi's hand found hers, firm, steady, and he said, "Noise is not truth." Nights were worse, hunger pressing like an unwelcome guest, yet he never let her feel entirely abandoned. He brewed ginger tea when she coughed, memorized her laugh as though it was a map. And once when she returned from lectures weary, he pressed a small bundle of crumpled notes into her palm, saying only, "For your fees, use it," though he never explained where the money came from. Questions gnawed at her, but exhaustion silenced them. Meanwhile, Uzo appeared often with errands cloaked in secrecy, sometimes handing files to Kenichi, sometimes whispering into his phone, "Yes, sir, it's done," words that pricked Amara's curiosity, though she swallowed them quietly. Felicia visited once, standing at the doorway with perfume too loud for the small room, scoffing, "So this is marriage? No fridge, no generator, no future?" Her eyes sharp as machetes. But Kenichi only smiled faintly and said, "You are welcome, madame. Sit if you wish." Hospitality dissolving insult, and Amara for the first time felt a flicker of pride. She realized that though the world mocked his blindness, Kenichi carried a strength that did not need sight, and while she still wrestled with resentment at being forced into this union, she began to sense that destiny had placed her not in a cage, but at the edge of a revelation the village could not yet see, a revelation that would one day turn whispers of shame into songs of awe. Morning in the bungalow began with roosters crowing beyond the bread kiosk, the smell of frying akara drifting through broken windows, and Amara stirring a pot of watery pap while Kenichi's cane tapped the floor in a rhythm as steady as a drummer's beat. and though the room was humble, just a mattress, a kerosene stove, and shelves filled with carefully labeled trays, Amara noticed how her husband's blindness did not cage him, but rather shaped a discipline others could not see, for he moved with memorized race, counting steps, aligning objects by touch, arranging phone parts with the precision of a jeweler. Still, poverty pressed hard, and some nights hunger tightened their stomachs until silence was louder than words. But Kenichi never let despair master him. Instead, he whispered, "Tomorrow will bring something." And somehow it always did. A loaf of bread bought with mysterious cash, a handful of crumpled notes slipped into her palm just before tuition deadlines, money that seemed to appear from nowhere. And though Amara asked once, "Where does this come from?" he only smiled gently and said, "Focus on your dream. Let me worry about the rest." And his tone carried a finality she dared not push against. At the university, her classmates gossiped mercilessly, whispering, "She is the blind man's wife," laughter following her like a shadow. And once when she waited at the gate, students pointed openly, mocking, "See Chief Okoye's daughter, from convoy to cane, from dignity to disgrace." And though her cheeks burned with shame, when she turned her head, she found Kenichi standing a short distance away, cane upright, face calm, and the quiet strength in his posture steadied her like an anchor in stormy seas. But Felicia, her stepmother, was not finished with cruelty. She arrived one humid afternoon, her wrapper tied too tightly, her perfume choking the air, her eyes already measuring the room with contempt, and she demanded, "Where is your fridge? Where is your generator? Where is your sense?" And before Amara could respond, Kenichi turned his face toward the venom and answered with quiet dignity, "You are welcome here, madam. Sit if you wish." And his calm disarmed the insult, leaving Felicia muttering but unsettled. Though when she returned home, she hissed to her children, "She will beg for mercy soon. Let her rot in blindness and poverty," not knowing that her mockery was sowing seeds of her own undoing. Days later, as Amara walked home weary from lectures, her sandals worn thin, a nylon bag rustled into her hand from behind, and when she turned, it was Kenichi, offering bread without words, his lips twitching into the faintest smile, and her stomach growled with hunger's betrayal, forcing her to accept. And as she ate under candlelight that night, tears dropped into the bread, for it was the only meal she had seen in 2 days, and gratitude, shame, and wonder knotted in her chest. From that evening onward, he became her unexpected ally, sometimes appearing with food, sometimes with money, sometimes with nothing but presence when loneliness pressed too hard. And though society continued to laugh, branding her the madman's wife, she began to see through the disguise of dreadlocks and torn shirts, glimpsing a gentleness, a courage, a heart that kept giving when everyone else abandoned her. And when Felicia next sneered, "So it is true, you walk with a blind beggar," Amara lifted her chin and answered, "Yes, but he has given me what you never did, kindness." Words that struck like thunder, leaving Felicia stunned, for the orphan she thought she had crushed was learning to speak with the voice of dignity. And deep inside Amara herself, a seed of faith began to grow, whispering that perhaps her forced marriage was not a curse after all, but the hidden doorway to a destiny the world was not ready to see.
The weeks that followed hardened Amara like clay pressed under fire, for each day was a test of endurance, and each night a trial of faith. And though she carried her books to class with the determination of a soldier carrying weapons, hunger and whispers trailed her steps like shadows. Yet always, when she was near breaking, Kenichi appeared with small miracles. Bread wrapped in newspaper, tuition fees folded into envelopes with no explanation, or simply his steady presence waiting at the gate as if his blindness sharpened his hearing to detect her despair before she spoke it. And Amara began to wonder whether destiny had conspired to send her a husband who, though the world mocked, understood her pain more deeply than anyone. Still, Felicia's claws reached for her like the greedy fingers of debt. For one evening she stormed into the bungalow with a crooked agent carrying stamped papers that reeked of forgery, and she slammed them onto the wooden table, declaring, "Your late father owed me, Amara, and by this contract his property is mine, unless you sign and surrender your claim." Her words slithering with false sweetness, but her eyes burning with triumph. and Amara's hands trembled as she read the lies, yet before fear could silence her, she lifted her chin and whispered, "No," a refusal that shocked Felicia, whose laughter cracked like glass breaking. "You dare defy me? Then prepare for shame. I will tell the world your blind husband is nothing but a beggar, and no one will respect you again." Amara's heart thundered, but before her lips could shape a reply, Kenichi leaned forward, his cane across his knees, and spoke softly, "Madam, truth walks slowly, but it cannot be killed." And his calm dignity disarmed the room, leaving Felicia hissing as she stormed out, muttering that the girl would soon beg for mercy. That same week, Chike ambushed Amara outside her clinic, his plastered grin reeking of beer as he hissed, "Bring the deed, small nurse, or we will bring the police." But before his hand could tighten around her arm, Uzo appeared from nowhere, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp with authority as he said, "Leave now." And Chike stumbled backward, disappearing into the crowd. Amara blinked, stunned, for Uzo's tone carried weight far heavier than that of an errand boy. And when she turned to Kenichi later, questions swelled on her lips, but he only asked if she had eaten, leaving mysteries unsolved, but trust quietly deepening. Yet the tension grew thicker, for one night, Amara returned home to find a black SUV idling at the junction, its headlights watching like a predator, and though it rolled away before she could speak, unease twisted in her chest, until Kenichi, sensing her silence, squeezed her hand and murmured, "Do not fear shadows, they only remind us there is light." Words that calmed her, though not her curiosity. Still, destiny refused to pause, for the very next day a parcel arrived under the door, an envelope thick with Naira notes, more than enough to pay her tuition and settle rent. And scrawled on the flap in careful, deliberate letters were 3 words, "Don't give up." Tears blurred her eyes as she pressed the envelope to her chest, realizing that the man everyone mocked as blind and poor was somehow the one ensuring her survival. And though she did not yet know the full truth, though she still believed herself shackled by her stepmother's cruelty, a fire began to burn quietly inside her, a fire of resilience, of love taking root in unexpected soil, and of a destiny preparing to reveal itself in ways that would silence every laugh, every sneer, and every insult hurled at her name.
The storm clouds of Felicia's greed thickened, and soon Amara found herself pressed into corners where even breath felt taxed. For her stepmother returned again with threats dressed as scripture, her tongue dripping venom as she hissed, "Sign the paper, girl, or watch your blind husband dragged to the streets like the beggar he is." But Amara's refusal was iron, her voice trembling but steady as she answered, "My father's name is not for sale." And though Felicia stormed away, her eyes glittered with a promise that battles yet lay ahead. Life in the bungalow became a tightrope between scarcity and strange provision. For though the rice pot often ran shallow and kerosene hissed into silence before night fully fell, somehow, at the very edge of despair, resources appeared. Fees cleared at school, textbooks delivered at the clinic, envelopes of money slipped beneath the door. And though Amara asked questions with searching eyes, Kenichi only smiled faintly and said, "Providence finds a way." But she noticed other details now. His disappearances early in the morning when he dressed not in the patched shirts of a market trader, but in pressed clothes faintly scented of leather and cologne. His cane tapping confidently as Uzo whisked him away in that same quiet Corolla. And his return at dusk with dust on his shoes, yet the trace of exhaustion that smelled not of market stalls, but of boardrooms and long decisions. She tried to stitch these pieces into sense, but each time she asked, he would change the subject, asking instead about her classes, her dreams, her health, until she felt guilty for suspecting. Meanwhile, Felicia's pressure sharpened. She sent Chike again, this time with 2 loud-mouthed friends who blocked Amara's path after lectures, sneering, "Where is the deed? Bring it or see shame on the front pages." But once again, Uzo appeared, his calm demeanor cutting through their noise, his phone already dialing as he said, "You have been warned," and the bullies slunk away like dogs scolded with a whip. Amara's suspicion deepened, for Uzo was no mere cousin. His posture carried the discipline of someone who answered to power. And when she whispered her doubts to Kenichi that night, he only placed his hand over hers and said, "When the time is right, truth will stand naked, but until then, trust me." The tension weighed heavy, and Felicia, sensing her forged papers might fail, began to poison the air with gossip, telling neighbors, "Amara has married a fool, a blind man who feeds on scraps. Soon you will see her crawling back to beg at my door." Yet Amara, though her heart stung, found new steel in her spine, lifting her head in the market when whispers circled, answering softly but firmly, "Yes, I married him, and when all of you turned your backs, he gave me bread." And her dignity silenced many, planting seeds of doubt where mockery once grew. One night, during a rainstorm that drummed hard on the leaking roof, Amara sat with Kenichi, both of them damp from chasing basins to catch water, and she burst into tears, sobbing, "Why must life humiliate us so?" And he drew her into his arms, whispering against her hair, "Because storms teach roofs where they leak, and storms teach hearts where they are strong. Hold fast, Amara. This night is long, but dawn is near." She wanted to believe, but fear still clawed inside her chest. But his words, his steady hands, and the quiet certainty in his voice planted a fragile hope. And though she still saw him through the world's eyes as poor and blind, she began to realize there was something unshakable beneath the disguise, something waiting, like a lion crouched in tall grass, ready to rise at the appointed hour.
By the time Harmots and winds brushed Enugu with dust, Felicia's determination to crush Amara had ripened into schemes darker than before, for she now sought not just to steal property, but to erase dignity. And so she marched to the bungalow one Saturday morning, dragging a self-styled pastor whose booming voice could make windows tremble. And she shouted through the doorway, "Deliver this girl from shame! Deliver her blind husband from madness! Cast out this curse of poverty!" Her voice rising in theatrics that drew neighbors from their compounds. And the pastor laid his palm on the wooden door, declaring, "If you do not sign, calamity shall be your portion." But Amara, weary yet sharpened by pain, rose from her stool and answered firmly, "Real prophecy does not come with blackmail." Her words carrying such clarity that even gossipers shifted uncomfortably. And Felicia's face burned as she hissed, "Stubborn girl, you will learn." That evening, as Amara sat tracing notes by candlelight, a faint tap touched her window, soft as a lizard's toes on zinc. And when she peered through the bars, her heart leapt. It was Kenichi, or rather the man she thought she knew, but tonight his dreadlocks were tucked under a cap, his face sharper, and in his hands he held a small parcel which he slipped carefully through the grill. Inside, she found sachet water, prenatal vitamins, and bread, along with a note scrawled in deliberate letters, "Hold fast, do not sign anything, 2 days, K." Tears blinded her as she pressed the note to her chest, realizing that behind his silence, her husband was watching every detail, protecting even what she had not spoken aloud. The next day, Felicia struck again, locking Amara inside the old storeroom of her father's compound under the pretense of discipline, sliding bowls of plain rice under the door, taunting through the slot, "Sign the papers and you will breathe air again." But Amara, hand on her growing belly, whispered back through tears, "My child will not be born into lies." And though fear clawed her, courage rooted deeper.
Outside, unknown to her, Kenichi moved with precision, summoning men in crisp suits, lawyers with files, bankers with ledgers, and Uzo coordinating quietly like a soldier in battle. Neighbors saw only a blind man still selling chargers at dusk, but in back offices across the city, a hidden empire stirred. Documents stamped, properties traced, bank accounts flagged, all under the command of the same man dismissed as a beggar. By the second night, the air around Felicia's house thickened with unease, for engines rumbled at the junction, black SUVs parked discreetly like panthers waiting, and guards who once laughed at the blind fool now shifted nervously at his steady cane taps. Inside the storeroom, Amara prayed with her palms flat on the dusty floor, whispering her mother's psalm again and again. And when she closed her eyes, she saw not darkness, but Kenichi's note, its 3 words pulsing like a second heartbeat. Hold fast. 2 days. Dawn approached heavy as prophecy, and though she still believed she was married to a poor blind man, something in her spirit whispered that her husband was more than the world had told her, that his silence was not emptiness, but strategy, and that soon, very soon, truth would break its disguise like thunder splitting the sky.
The dawn of the second day arrived with an uneasiness that spread across the compound like smoke from a hidden fire. For neighbors whispered of strange cars at the junction, engines too smooth to belong to taximen, guards too disciplined to be ordinary watchmen. And though Felicia laughed it off, boasting to her friends, "She will sign today or rot forever," her laughter trembled faintly, as if her spirit sensed what her mouth refused to admit. And inside the locked storeroom, Amara pressed her hands over her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "Hold on, my love. Your father promised 2 days, and I believe him," though her body quivered with fear. By mid-afternoon, the air thickened with a sound that silenced even gossip. A convoy rolling slowly into the street, black SUVs gliding like panthers in formation, tinted windows reflecting the sun like mirrors, and at the center a silver Rolls-Royce Phantom, its hood gleaming like the crown of a king. The guards at the gate straightened, confusion scrambling their faces as neighbors gasped, some pressing hands to their mouths, others whispering, "Who owns this? Is it government? Is it foreign visitors?" Then the Rolls-Royce door opened, and silence fell heavier than rain. Stepping out was a man in a navy blue Italian suit, beard trimmed sharp, dark glasses gleaming, cane now more like a scepter than a crutch. He moved with calm authority, shoulders squared, each step echoing power. And when the glasses came off, the street inhaled as one, for it was Kenichi, the blind man mocked as a beggar, but no longer in rags, no longer hidden. His eyes, though clouded, burned with clarity of soul, and his presence carried the weight of someone the world had once underestimated, but could never contain. Neighbors whispered furiously, "Is that not the blind traitor? Jesus, he is a king!" While Felicia stumbled backward on her veranda, clutching her wrapper as though cloth could protect her from revelation. Without raising his voice, Kenichi commanded the gate open, and the guards, who once laughed, obeyed instantly. He walked straight to the storeroom, ignoring Felicia's shrieks of protest, his security men fanning out like shadows swallowing her compound. Inside, Amara's heart leapt as the bolt scraped back, and when the iron door swung open, her eyes widened in disbelief, for standing in the doorway was not the poor husband she thought she had married, but a man dressed in wealth, trimmed, commanding, his suit alone worth more than Felicia's entire wardrobe, yet his gaze soft as it fell on her. "Amara," he said gently, stretching out his hand, "it's me." She trembled, tears streaming. "Kenichi?" "Yes," he whispered, pulling her into his arms, "the man you married, but not the man they told you I was. I am Kenichi Oba,
CEO of Obi Works, an empire built in silence, and I lived as a poor blind man to find what money cannot buy, true love. Her knees nearly buckled as sobs broke free, and she pressed her face against his chest, gasping, "All this time, I thought you had nothing." "No," he replied, holding her tighter. "I had nothing without you. But now, together, we have everything." Outside, Felicia's screams turned to stammers as she realized the beggar she mocked commanded fleets of cars, teams of lawyers, and wealth beyond imagination. Neighbors who once spat at Amara now bowed their heads, murmuring, "She is his queen." And in that moment, the story shifted forever. For the orphan forced into a marriage meant to break her had unknowingly become the wife of a king in disguise, and the world would never laugh again.
Evening cloaked the sky in bruised orange when the convoy roared to life again, but this time it was not only a parade of wealth, it was judgment moving on wheels, for Kenichi had revealed himself not as the blind beggar mocked in markets, but as the storm no one expected. And his first destination after rescuing Amara was Felicia's veranda, where she stood trembling, her voice stripped of arrogance, her wrapper loose as if shame had untied its knots. And though she tried to force a smile, stammering, "My son, forgive, we did not know," Kenichi silenced her with a single glance, his cane tapping the tiles like a gavel. "You knew enough," he said, voice low but carrying. "You stole from the orphan of your own husband's brother. You mocked her tears. You locked her in darkness, yet you called me mad. Tell me, Felicia, does madness command empires? Does poverty ride in a Rolls Royce?" She collapsed onto her knees, hands raised, but Kenichi did not touch her. Instead, he turned to Amara, his tone softening. "You decide, my wife, mercy or justice." And Amara, her belly rounding with new life, her face streaked with tears of both pain and pride, looked at the woman who had sold her dignity for coins and whispered, "Let the law speak." Within hours, files prepared long before by unseen hands were laid on magistrates' desks. Bank transfers, forged contracts, testimonies of neighbors, and dawn broke on a courtroom where Felicia sat cornered, the weight of her lies collapsing like a roof eaten by termites, and when the gavel struck, the verdict was clear. All property and estate of the late Chief Okoye is hereby restored to his daughter, Amara Okoye. The defendants stand liable for fraud and unlawful possession. Neighbors who once sneered now muttered in awe. The blind man was never blind to truth, while Amara stood tall, hand clasped in Kenichi's, finally reclaiming her father's name. That same week, the gates of a sprawling estate opened for her. Fountains leaping in silver arcs, marble floors reflecting her every step, staff bowing and greeting, "Welcome, madame," words that cut deeper than any insult Felicia had ever hurled, for now she was honored where she had once been mocked. In the backyard, Kenichi unveiled a surprise, a newly built clinic named Okoye Free Care Unit, its plaque gleaming, "Dignity is a right." And he pressed the keys into her hand, saying, "This is your dream, Amara. Heal where others wound, build where others tear down." Tears washed her cheeks as she clutched the keys, whispering, "From the dust of shame, God has raised a crown." That night, as the city lights glittered beyond their balcony, Amara rested her head on Kenichi's shoulder, whispering, "They called you mad, they called me foolish, yet here we stand." And he kissed her forehead, replying, "Love tested in hunger is love proven in fire. And now no wealth, no insult, no darkness can break it." The convoy engines hummed like a lullaby below. Neighbors still gathered outside the gates, whispering legends already forming. And inside, a once orphaned girl and a man once dismissed as worthless held hands, knowing that their story would outlive every mockery,
a testimony that sometimes the disguises of fate are painful, but when they are lifted, they reveal a destiny no enemy can bury.